Good afternoon, good evening, I should say. I'm Lee Cromarty. I'm with the Institute of Industrial Engineers. We have my organization here this evening. We have CAPM, and we have SWE and Chef. And so welcome, thank you. We have 4 different groups tonight having a joint meeting, and we really appreciate you coming. I have the pleasure of introducing our speaker this evening, Forrest Freifogel. He is someone I got to hear last year speak. And someone made a comment that these seats are so comfortable you can fall asleep. You are going to hear a really, really nice presentation this evening. You won't fall asleep. It's a good message, and I'm not even going to give the story away because he builds it so nicely. So just want to say that his background is in IBM for 24 years. He then has started his own business, Smarter Solutions. And I think you're going to get a lot out of this evening. This is something you're going to be able to take back tomorrow and start implementing some things of your own. It's a very, very good message, and I'm not going to say any more than that. I do want to say that we are not going to have voice. All the people who've called in are not going to be able to ask questions, but there is a chat line, and that you will be able to put your questions in over the chat line. And Forrest knows that it's going to be there, so he will read the question and give the answer after his presentation. And we also have this evening the IIE Northeast Region Vice President, John Corliss. John, we weren't able to get you an email ahead of time, but if you could please put your comments into that chat section, and everybody will read that chat section so that they can see your comments this evening. I apologize that you can't speak over this. All right. And with that, we have Forrest.
Great to be here. How many people feel really good about their retirement 401ks and all their investments right now? And not too good of feelings, right? Well, I asked the question. I said, we're doing all these management systems, we're doing all this process improvement, and still we've got some fundamental problems. The question is, why didn't these other systems prevent these things from happening? And to me, that's a very valid question. We have people going through, and they're very smart people from MBA programs and wherever else, but the thing is, we're having metrics and strategies and so on that's really driving the wrong kind of behaviors. So what I'm going to be talking about tonight is why go beyond Lean Six Sigma and the balanced scorecard. Now let's break this topic down into pieces. First, I'll talk about Lean Six Sigma. Now Lean's got some great tools in it, and it's focusing on waste reduction. Six Sigma has got some great tools also. It focuses on defect reduction. So we put those together, and if we have a program, we call it Lean Six Sigma. And the idea behind this program is to do projects that are to have value to the company as a whole, and that the company can benefit from these. Now that makes perfectly good sense, doesn't it? But does it? Does it always drive the right activities for the enterprise as a whole? Now let's look at another portion of this sentence. It's called scorecards. So let's say, for example, you're the manager of an organization. Now, doesn't it make perfectly good sense to go in and have scorecards throughout the organization, and then what we do is we establish goals for each of these various functions and various people, and then we manage those people to those goals. Now that's perfectly good sense, doesn't it? But does it? Does it really lead to the right kind of behaviors? Both Lean Six Sigma and the scorecards did their job. In my mind, we wouldn't have these problems that we have today. I personally believe that we need to evaluate our management business systems and look at them differently so we create a governance system so we actually lead to what I call the 3 R's of business. That's everybody doing the right things and doing them right at the right time. That's what it's really about. Not playing games with numbers, not trying to build strategy or addressing strategies that maybe you can't get your arms around and really benefit the enterprise as a whole. In this session, I'm going to be talking about scorecards, be talking about strategy building, also be talking about firefighting, and then finally another system called Integrated Enterprise Excellence. This is going to be a very different management system that I'm going to be leading up to. It's going to take a lot of changes for everybody to take on and do the whole thing, but the beauty of it, you don't necessarily have to do everything at once. But I want to go in and describe this overall system to you, and I want you to go in and just take it all in and see if it really makes sense. Now, this may be something that you cannot do tomorrow. It may be something that's going to be a little bit higher than you are, so I don't know where you're at in the organization. But just take it in and see if this doesn't really make sense. Let's talk about 3 type failures that you might have. One of them is metrics driving the wrong behaviors, scorecards driving the wrong kind of behavior, and unneeded firefighting. Can you relate to those issues? Can you see how we can be playing games with numbers, trying to meet some goals that really don't make a whole lot of sense if we step back and was honest with ourselves? Do you have any firefighting in your organization? Not saying you have it, but I've heard some organizations actually have rooms down the hall that they call war rooms, where everybody gets together once a week or once a day, describes the kind of problems that they have, and then they assign tasks to who takes on what kind of problems we had that week. So we want to say, does that really lead to the right kind of behaviors and long-lasting improvements? Or is there another way of looking at the data? Let's consider metrics, and let's consider how we might have initiatives that can drive the wrong kind of behavior. Now, some organizations have had, or mandates maybe, that everybody is to reduce costs. So this example I'm going to be talking about is an IT organization, and they had this particular type of mandate. So what did they decide to do? They decided to reduce the number of systems that they had out there from 15 to 1. And they were going to do it in a very short period of time so that they could meet their goals. Can you imagine what kind of havoc that could have created? Do you think that their customers in the organizations are going to really appreciate that? Do you think that really helped the enterprise as a whole? Let's talk about efficiency metrics. It's really important to have metrics that drive the right kind of behavior. However, that's easier said than done. Let's consider a chicken efficiency metric. This company has franchises throughout the country, and they wanted to go in and establish a measurement. And one of the measurements that they had was chicken efficiency. That was a simple metric. Basically, you looked at the end of the day, the amount of chicken sold divided by chicken cooked. Better percentage, better number, higher number meant that you did better. Only makes sense, right? Now, this one franchise really did a great job. So what did they do? They gave them all sorts of accolades. They wanted to make them the model. Finally, they said, let's go in and look, what is this particular franchise actually doing? And what did they discover? 2 hours before closing time, they stopped cooking chicken. After that period of time, they only made chicken to order. Now, if it's a fast food restaurant, most people are not willing to wait that 15 minutes, and they just simply left. So, in fact, they didn't sell as much chicken. So, in other words, this chicken efficiency metric sounded like the right thing, but it really didn't drive the right kind of behavior on the whole. So what we want to do is have metrics that drive the right kind of behavior. Now the question is, let's say that you had to go off and address how you would create metrics throughout your organization. Perhaps the lead person in your organization went to a presentation and said, man, we need to have balanced scorecard metrics. So we need to have metrics throughout the organization. Now, how would you do it? Well, most people, what they would do is go off and look at the organization chart and approach every department and say, what do you actually do, and how should we go in and measure it? Kind of makes sense, doesn't it? But does it? What happens whenever you go in and reorganize? Gee whiz, now all of a sudden your metrics can change. So it could actually change on you. And then you have to go in and redo it. I don't know if you've heard of the company Enron. Okay. Well, now what happened with Enron? Well, they went in, and we're a very metric-driven company. If you were an executive, you were established goals, and you needed to meet those goals. You had to do whatever it takes to meet those goals. Now, at first, what happened is people just started doing some things that were maybe a little gray areas so they could move things around financially or do some things with their accounting practices. And that was maybe a little bit on the gray area. And then it kind of got a little bit darker and darker and darker, and then it verged on being illegal. And finally, some of the people found vertical bars in front of their faces. So they ended up a lot of problems. Now, I think a lot of the problems we're experiencing this time frame we're at relative to the financial market has got a lot of similarities to this. It may not be quite the same thing, but keep in mind what happened. Because of the Enron problem, what do we create? Sarbanes-Oxley, or SOX. Now, the question I ask of you, in spirit, shouldn't SOX have prevented the kind of problems we've had? Now, in reality, I understand when you start looking into what actually SOX does, it's just a matter of making sure nobody cheats on the numbers. In reality, it wouldn't probably, but don't you think it should have? As much money as companies was paying for SOX? To me, it kind of makes sense. But in reality, it didn't. Now, the question I ask of you is, do you believe all the unethical MBAs migrated to Enron, or did the measurement system of Enron, and perhaps a lot of the companies that are having problems now, lead to the destructive behaviors? And I tend to vote for the latter. And I think you probably do too. Most of you would. So we have to be careful on how we go in and put together metrics. Now, there's a real good book. It's called Real Numbers, a Lean Accounting System. Now, this book, written by financial type people, CFO level people. So it's not for me. It's people that are considered experts in their industry. Now, they've made several statements in their book, and I've taken and noting several of them here. Now, the first bullet talks about management has learned to understand and to talk about their departments, not in terms of income and cost, but variances to goal that have little relationship to reality. To me, that's not very good. The second bullet talks about those same managers have learned that they could go in and nudge variances to goals up or down to make a bad picture look better. That's not very good either. Now, the third bullet is really scary. Okay, they talk about the accounting system, the fundamental accounting system is so complicated that a skinny man can look fat in a funhouse mirror situation by simply shifting their position. Now, who did that in spades? It's Enron. So we've got some real fundamental issues that we need to address on not only for the accounting system and how we actually take things on. Now, have you ever seen any type of statements that are like this? Have you seen tables like this? See a lot of heads shaking up and down. I think we all have, right? Now, if you go back and look at the columns, how are they laid out? They're laid out annually, right? Okay? Now, why is it laid out annually? These metrics or performance metrics that we're trying to do are not really annual. But why do we do it annually? Maybe it's goals, or somehow statements we want to compare year to year. But why do we want to do that? Does it make sense? If we actually shifted it by a month, instead of looking at it from January to December if we're doing things annually, if we went in and did it from February to January, we could get completely different numbers. Nobody seems to talk about that. What happens if there was a change in June? Would we be able to see it? Not really, because we're actually, for that year, averaging or looking at the effects of both old and new processes, maybe that changed in June. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense, does it? But we do this kind of reporting all the time. This kind of reporting is like driving your car looking at a rearview mirror. It's not very healthy. What we would like to do is go out and look forward. Now, when somebody makes a presentation like this, what invariably you're going to get? I would say 99.9% of the time. What are you going to get? There's something that's common. You're going to get stories. Just think about the last one you saw that had a similar chart like this, and it might even be a pie chart or a line chart. You're going to go in and have people talk about the ups and downs and what happened here, what happened there, trying to talk through the actual presentation that you're giving. Is it talking about the process? Is it talking about anything about the future? Not really. It may be true or may not be true. I don't know. But the thing is, that's invariably what you get. Now, I'm not against stories, but I would like to have given the same process or the same system of looking at it so that Joe and Mary, if they look at that process, they make the same story. Now, somebody might create a chart like this, or somebody else could create a pie chart. Somebody else could create a stack bar chart. And in those situations, you can get completely different stories and completely different ways of looking at a process. And I'm suggesting that's not very good. You would like to have some sort of commonality when somebody's reporting on a particular process. And you would also like to have it so that they're looking out forward. And if you don't like what you see when you look out forward, then you need to make a correction. You need to turn the steering wheel. How many people have heard about or familiar with balanced scorecards, the balanced scorecard? Okay, quite a few people. Now, in case of balanced scorecards, we typically look at 4 different quadrants. We talk about the customer, financials, internal process, and learning and growth. And the idea is you take those different metrics or those different areas, and then you cascade them throughout the organization. Now, it's important to look at customer, obviously, because if you ignore the customer, you could be doing the wrong thing, obviously, instead of just looking at profits. So that makes sense. And it's also important to have good balance. For example, you don't want to go in and meet on-time delivery and sacrifice quality. Something you just don't want to do. But the thing is, I'm suggesting forced balance is not necessarily the right thing to do. Because sometimes you can create metrics that just really don't make a whole lot of sense. Now, in addition with the balanced scorecard, what it's doing is it's aligning these scorecards to your strategy. Now, this might seem to be very good, but is it? Does this really drive the activities? Right activities, because each category is to have objectives, measures, targets, and initiatives. So whenever we come up with a strategy, we're supposed to have a plan and measurement that is aligned to that strategy. It kind of sounds like it makes sense, but is it? Does it really drive the right kind of behaviors? That's what I'm really focusing on here. I want to lead to the 3 R's of business. Everybody doing the right things, doing them right at the right time for the enterprise as a whole. Now what I'd like for you to do is to read over the section that begins, example for a service organization. And then what we'll do is we'll talk about it. Now I ask you, is that paragraph, or could that paragraph be something similar that you might go in and get from an executive retreat? I'm seeing some heads nods here. Okay, now if we're going to do the balance score, what we want to do is we want to create metrics that's aligned to this strategy. So what might those metrics look like? Well, this is how you might have a set of metrics that's aligned to those. Now, this would be a red, yellow, green scorecard fashion. Now, this is taken from my book, one of my books, and I represent red as black, and kind of the gray area, there's yellow, and then green is white. And whenever you see an exclamation point, that's red, and therefore you need to take action to resolve the issue. Kind of makes sense. You're not meeting your goal, right? But is it? Does it really drive their activity? Does it lead to the 3 R's of business? Again, that is everybody doing the right things, doing them right at the right time. So let's look at one of those metrics. In this metric, we're looking at customer satisfaction. Now, if you would have read that strategic plan, or if you recall what was said in that strategic plan or what was documented, it said you were to have 100% customer satisfaction. Now, one, is that a good goal? This particular chart doesn't even show a time series fashion. I'd like to have a volunteer sign up for this one. What are you going to end up doing first if you had to do this? Probably going to start working on your resume just as a back plan, plan B. But secondly, what you're going to do probably is do everything you can to make the numbers look good. If you have this kind of goal, is it really in your best interest to get true voice of the customer? Not really. It's really to meet the numbers. And what we really need in the organization is to get voice of the customer and do the right thing for the customer, and just going in and meeting the numbers doesn't necessarily address that. So you've had surveys, I'm sure, where you might not have been pleased with the customer satisfaction, or you didn't have customer satisfaction, and you couldn't fill out the survey to really display or convey the problems that you had. It's almost like they wanted to make the numbers look good. So we need to have customer feedback, but sometimes we can have metrics that drive the wrong kind of behavior. Let's look at another metric that was the result of that strategic initiative that came out of our executive retreat. In that, it said to have 20% profit margins. Notice how they're reporting this. It's got 1 through 12. So it's got time series. That's good, but look how they're doing it. I venture to say that 1 to 12 would be months, right? And 1 would probably be the first month after the fiscal year. So what they're doing is tracking to see how well they're doing relative to these goals that are set against them. Now, do you know how the organization has performed before this particular time? You don't have a clue. You're measuring against the goals. Now, what company really had problems with this? Or they had Enron. Enron basically did this. You know, they established goals financially, and if you didn't meet them, you're going to be out of here. So this can drive the wrong kind of behaviors. So we need to have goals, but if we go in and just set these goals, and if you don't meet them next month, that can lead to problems. If we start reflecting on the typical metrics that I've been talking about here, we notice that a lot of times we'll talk about fiscal year metrics. We'll also talk about metrics, and they're not really related to process improvement activities. Basically, it'll say, throughout the organization, we're establishing all these goals. You meet this, you meet that, you meet that. But we're really not giving people time to go in and make those improvements. Because after you get past the low-hanging fruit, meeting these goals is not easy. It can be very difficult. And in some places it may be easy, some places it could be hard. But just establishing goals is not going to make it happen. Often what happens, we look at point-to-point comparison. There is variability in the process, and just by looking and making point-to-point comparison can draw you the wrong kind of behaviors. You have to understand there is variability and make that or consider variability when you're making your statements. Now, it's important to really understand what happens. In the world, we have a process, and it's going to have various steps. In this case, we got 4 steps shown here, and it's going to have inputs to those processes. The output of this process is Y, and Y is a function of X. So the input, that is the X's, it can drive the Y's. So the output, if you don't like the answer, you have to go in and change the inputs, or you got to change the process, period. That's what you have to do. But if you go in and just try to manage to the Y values and not really understand it and get it here, what can happen? It can be leading to the wrong kind of behaviors or playing games with numbers. So we need to really understand that. So what we would like to instead have a view of the enterprise as a whole where we understand it. We get it here in our hearts so that the output of this process is a function of all the inputs and of what we do in the process. In other words, just by setting goals is not going to make a change. We want to understand that the metrics, and we want to view the metrics as a result of these process steps. And we want to also not put our head in the sand, but acknowledge that variability is going to occur. And we need to take that into account when we make our statements. And finally, we need to really understand if we're going to make improvement, we need to do things systematically to the overall process. And that's not across-the-board improvement, but analyze the overall system to figure out where we should focus our efforts. For example, if we got a company that can't sell everything they make, they need to be working on the sales process. If another company can sell everything they make, they need to be working on the manufacturing process. But what happens often is we'll sit across the board, we're going to say everybody should cut costs or everybody should improve efficiency by a certain percent. But that does not impact the overall organization as a whole equally. And in fact, you can actually make things worse. So what we like to do is actually have a system so it puts it all together and reviewing the overall enterprise when we're establishing the goals throughout the organization. Now, in order to do this, we have to look at our metrics differently. I've had a couple terms. One is satellite level metrics and the other is 30,000-foot level metrics. Now, satellite level metrics are financial metrics. We're talking about profit margins and total revenue, those kind of statements. And 30,000-foot level metrics are defects, are on-time delivery, or how long does it take to process an invoice, those sorts of things. Could be transaction, could be manufacturing. Now, the difference in both of those cases is we are not going to be bounded by calendar year. If nothing has changed in 10 years, we got 10 years worth of data. If something changed a month ago, we got a month of data to make a statement about how life is right now anyway. Now, the 30,000-foot level metric have a correlation to the satellite level metrics. In other words, if we reduce our defect rates, then our financials are going to look better. It only kind of makes sense. Now, we understand also, if we go in and systematically improve the 30,000-foot level metrics in areas that are important to the business, we can actually impact the overall picture of the business relative to the satellite metrics. And what we want to do is not just go and create strategies as step number one, but we would like to go in and analyze and innovatively look at the overall system to develop the strategies. So in my books that I've passed around here, and that we're going to talk a little bit about at the end, I included that as step 5. Our strategies at step 5 is fundamentally processed on actually manage the business, which is a 9-step process, not step 1. Now, you say, boy, that is really different. Often what happens is at the beginning of the year or some period of time, we build strategies and everything is to align these strategies. And if you really are honest with yourself, or at least some companies, I'm not saying your organization is like this, but people have to go in and create these strategies, and all of a sudden it gets to be rushed, push to shove, and all of a sudden they put something down the paper. And sometimes it's really hard to get your arms around on what these strategies mean, and they surely leave a lot for interpretation. You can have a strategy, I'm going to increase capacity. And is that really a strategy? Probably not. And in some products you should, and some you maybe shouldn't. It's not quite that simple. But just go back and look at your strategies, and then you start saying, is this really a good thing to be aligning our whole business to? So what we really want to do is establish goals for the satellite level metric, and then create a long-lasting system so that then we can build our strategies. Jim Collins in the book Good to Great, he talks about a level 5 leader. And a level 5 leader is not only a great leader when they're there, but also the organization maintains greatness when they're not there. Now the question I ask from you, is it possible for an organization that leads from strategies to create what I call a level 5 system? I suggest it's not possible. Why? Because strategies are dependent upon people and time. What you really need is a long-lasting framework in the front end, and then you figure out what your strategy is. You want to have metrics that are not aligned to the org chart, but aligned to the value chain. This is how you do business. This is what's long-lasting. This is what fundamentally doesn't change much year to year. And then you can start analyzing the system overall, and then figure out the strategies, and yes, those could change over time. But these strategies will be able and will have wording such that you can get your arms around them a lot more. So that is what I'm really leading to. Firefighting. I promised we were going to talk about that. What is it? We're trying to address the crisis of the day or the crisis of the week. Joe, you go do that one. Mary, you take care of that. That can really be a drain for the organization. Now, what's interesting, those people that were good firefighters, they kind of raised in the organization. And they're good at it. Some people even get an adrenaline rush from it. But the person that's a good fire preventer, they really do it right the first time to make sure you don't have to fight all those fires. They, in all honesty, a lot of times don't get as much recognition. It's really sad, but that's the real world. Because they just don't have as much visibility. So we want to start thinking about this, and is there a way to create measurements and look at metrics so that we don't have as much firefighting? Because what I'm going to suggest is a lot of times we're chasing things that are just common cause variability. They're just normal ups and downs. And the way we look at numbers, the way we look at metrics encourages us to do that. And so is there another way of doing it? How many people are familiar with red, yellow, green scorecards? Okay, we got a lot of hands going up here. What happens when you have red? Bad, and you have to start working on it, right?
Active action.
Now, this really looks like a good way of managing the businesses. You establish all these goals. The manager in charge looks down the right-hand column. That's the latest month or latest week or whatever. And they look at all the reds. Now you have Tom go do this, Sue go do that, Mary go take on that, because you're red. Oh, George, good job. Yours was green, now it was red, now it's green. Thank you for fixing that. Okay? So that's kind of how we go. And it sounds like a great thing, doesn't it? But is it? Does it really drive the right kind of behaviors? What I'm going to do is take this one red, yellow, green scorecard that does have a balanced framework. See how on the left-hand side it's got the 4 quadrants? This is a real one. And what we're going to do is just look at one of those and see if it's leading to the right kind of behaviors. And we're going to look at finance metric B. Now, if we look at finance metric B, we have 33% red and 50% green. So it's kind of toggling up and down, right? Now, again, I just want to make sure everybody's on the same page. Whenever it's red, we're supposed to take action. That's what the culture of the organization is biased on, or that's what it's driven by. Okay? Now, the results on this overall system can be counterproductive initiatives, 24/7 firefighting, the blame game, and proliferation of fanciful stories why goals were not met. You know, it's a little tongue-in-cheek, but can you relate to that? Now, what it also doesn't do, it doesn't tell you anything about the future. Remember, we're driving a car, and we like to look out the front windshield instead of driving in the back. It doesn't tell us anything about that. So now the question is, what if we looked at the numbers differently? Would it drive the same behaviors? Because remember, I'm trying to lead to 3 R's of business, everybody doing the right things, doing them right at the right time. That's what's really important to me. I don't want to have people doing things that don't make sense. So let's go in and examine this data differently. So what we're going to do is we're going to create and present this data in a control chart. Now, some of you may be familiar with control charts. If you're in the quality profession, you've seen these before. Now, in the quality profession, though, the primary focus on a control chart is to identify when special causes occur, stop the presses, and fix the problem. That's the traditional way of doing it. I'm not doing it. What I am doing is presenting them differently, and I got a whole scheme about how you present those, but I'm presenting them as such that I want to get a picture of what the process is doing relative to the customer needs and what's going to actually happen. That's my objective. I want to see what is happening in the process. And if there's differences between people's, machines, call centers, all that is a potential source of common cause variability. And I'm not interested in knee-jerking to any one of those things at any point in time. Now, there may be a difference between call centers if that's what we're looking at, but I'm really not trying to do that at this point in time. First off, I'm trying to see if we have a problem or not, or see if it's predictable. Okay? So now, if we go in and present this chart, you'll notice you've got 2 horizontal lines above the data, right? Now, the way those lines are calculated is from the variability between adjacent values, fundamentally. So if you got more variability between adjacent values, you're going to have wider limits. They call those control limits. If you got less, they're going to be narrow. So fundamentally, if you got more variability in your process, you're going to have wider limits. If you're going to have less variability, you're going to have narrower limits. That's the way life is for your particular process. Now, you may not like the answer, but that's the way it is. So, first off, we want to go in and look at our process. And we're not trying to make a statement about anything what we want or not, but we want to just look at our process and see if it changed. Because if it changed, we might have to make a statement before and afterwards, after it moved. It changed. Or it might have come and bounce along and went up here and, oh, gee whiz, I know what happened there. That was because we had electrical outage because we had a lightning storm. Okay, that's a special cause, and we want to look at that one individually. But if we just got normal up and down variability, we don't want to react to each one of those ups and downs. Now, if you look at that, people in quality will say this process is what? In statistical control. Now, I ask you, does the line operator really understand what that means? Does the CEO really understand what that means? Not really. So I don't like to use those words. I like to use the words, it's predictable. Now, isn't that exciting? Okay? It's predictable. So what does this imply? Gee, I can start looking out the windshield instead of driving in the rearview mirror. That's pretty neat. So, now, if our process changed, remember I was talking about June, and if it changed and this was June, I would see it. So I would be talking about the process before June and after June. And if June was when it changed, then I would be making statements of predictability since June occurred. That's the only data I could use because that's the only, that's where the process changed to a new level for some reason. Either we tried to do it or not. I don't know, but it changed. So in this case, we say the process is predictable. We don't see any shift. We don't see any special causes, spike outside these lines or trends or anything like that. Now, if I go back and tell your kids, I say this process is predictable, what are they going to ask me? Because I know if I ask you, you're going to try to read more into this question than it really is there. If I say this process is predictable, what should you be asking? What? Wow, that's a perfect response. That's often not what people say, is what do you predict, right? It makes sense. It's a fair question. I'm saying it's predictable. So the question, how are we going to do that? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to take this data in the region of predictability and consider it to be a random sample of the future. That's pretty exciting. Now, how are we going to look at that data, though? We're going to create what we call a probability plot. Now, this may be new to some of you, but it's quite a simple graph here. And on the x-axis, what it has is the magnitude of our response. So it's taking all that data and not presenting it in time series fashion, but it's presenting it as a collection of all the data in this region of predictability or region of stability. Everybody okay with that? So, for example, this lowest point here that we have here is equal to the lowest point there. The highest point that's up here is those 2 points there. Everybody okay with that? So that's the magnitude on the x-axis. Now the question is, what do we have on the y-axis? If you notice at the top it says normal distribution. It says normal, that means distribution. So what it is that y-axis is a particular scale such that if we plot data on this in a certain fashion, and it's from a normal distribution, that's the bell-shaped curve, it will appear to be a straight line. Everybody with me? Now, it doesn't have to be. There's other things we could do. We could look at it log normal, maybe have to skew to it. It's not a big deal. But for this set of data, and this is real data, it appears pretty normally distributed. Okay? Now, so is everybody okay with that? Now, how do you read the y-axis? That's percentage less than. Percentage less than. So, in our case, for the red, yellow, green, the value was 2.2. So if it got above 2.2, that was good. If it was below 2.2, that was bad. So the way we read this chart here, we're making a statement not only about the past, but in the future, we estimated there would be about 33% less than 2.2. So 33% of the time in the future, when we report, we believe that we're going to be give us a response that we're not going to like. It's going to be beyond specification, beyond this goal. Everybody with me? So we're not just making a statement about the past, but we're making a statement about the future. Now, if we don't like the future, we have to change it. Now, if you notice at the top, the way the red, yellow, green scorecard has us behaving is whenever you saw red indication, that means you need to fix it, or you needed to do something on it. Now, when we look at this data, do we believe they fixed anything? They didn't really fix anything. Now, they could have got accolades because it went from red to green. But in reality, they didn't fix anything. And that would be happening more than you think. Now, I was given a presentation similar, and I don't remember where it was at anymore, but somebody went in and they started laughing. And they said, you know, that happened to me. I was supposed to fix this one problem, it's red, and you know, before I had a chance to do anything, it turned green. He said, what should I do? I said, well, you take credit for it, of course, you know. But keep working on it because it's going to be a red again, and now you can really fix it. But that's what happens with variability. So what I'm suggesting is this is the way we need to present throughout the organization for continuous data. So how could you present it? You could go in and present it just like I showed there, where on the left-hand side, I'm saying, is it predictable? The next graph on the right-hand side, I'm making a prediction statement. And the way I'm presenting this to all levels of management, I make this statement right here. It's a predictable process with 33% performance. Now I sit down. Now, when you first present it, somebody's going to be talking about these ups and downs. Why did it go up and down? And you know, they're going to ask you those kind of questions. And what you say is, I don't know. Could be a lot of reasons. Say, is this a problem or not? And you might go in and talk about how much it's costing. I like to refer to that cost of doing nothing differently instead of cost of poor quality. How much does it cost the business because we have this particular situation? See how you could do that throughout the organization. Okay? But it's important here, remember I'm trying to lead to 3 R's of business. And I'm suggesting that the red, yellow, green score did not lead to 3 R's of business. But right now what we do is we have somebody understanding this is the why, this is the output, and if you don't like the answer, you got to figure out what's the difference. And then you're going to analyze it to try to figure out where I should focus my efforts. I might have a difference between machines, people, raw materials, or whatever. And then you're going to try to look at all the data in this region of stability to try to figure out where you should focus your efforts. See how that changed the behavior? How it changed the culture within the organization? Any questions? Got the idea? We're covering a lot of ground here, I know, but hopefully kind of making sense.
Now we're getting.
Now we got golf in here, right? If you put yourself at the high level within the organization, and somebody really wants to do the right thing for the organization as a whole, it's a hazardous region out there. It's like a golf course. You know, you've got liability suits, regulation, compliance, competition, commoditization. All these things are hazards to your organization as a whole, right? And what you really want to do is have a system that navigates through these organizational issues or these problems they can be having. And that's what I'm leading to right now, is what I call the Integrated Enterprise Excellence System. This system is not saying that you blow up everything that's happened in the past, but what it does is it builds upon the methodologies that we've had in the past, TQM, Total Quality Management, Theory of Constraints, Six Sigma, Lean Six Sigma, and puts it all together. Lean Six Sigma, we have to realize, is a project-based system. It's not a business system. So what can happen whenever you start looking at TQM or other project-based systems, it's an analogy to sanding a leg, polishing a handle, sanding the other side on a piece of furniture, you know, that you're refinishing. Where what the furniture looks like is basically the quality of your products and how your organization is being relative to profitability. So you can see when you sand the leg and polish the handle and so on, and do Kaizen events and Six Sigma projects and so on, you could be doing a lot of work, but the furniture still doesn't look very good. So what you'd really like to do is more than just projects. You would like to have a business system that leads to the 3 R's, and it helps us avoid the kind of problems that we've been experiencing right now in our current environment. We would like to have a governance system that's helping the organization as a whole, and it leads to the right things throughout the organization. So what we got here in this IEEE methodology is a high-level enterprise measurement system. We'd be building upon these 30,000-foot level metrics throughout the organization. We want to have it so we don't play games with numbers. We do have projects. We don't require a definition of a defect for every project. And what we really want to do is create a pool for project creation. That is, we want to have measurement goals at the 30,000-foot level, have an accountability to that, and if we look at the overall system as a whole, we want to identify areas that we need to make improvements. And the manager that's responsible for those particular areas or that 30,000-foot level metric does not actually know how to do it. Because that's the why. And they understand, they get it here in their heart, that they need to make a change to the X's or the process itself. They don't know how to do that, and that's fair. So you have to go in and do a project. Now their metric actually goes in and depends upon you being successful in the project. Now if you're doing Six Sigma or ACE or something else that's equivalent to or like Lean Six Sigma, think about what happens. We might have training starting next week, and everybody in training needs to have a project. Well, they don't have a project. So all of a sudden we're scurrying around trying to figure out what projects they should be working on. And so I call that a push for project creation. What we'd rather have is the measurement needs of the enterprise as a whole, figure out what you should be focusing on, and then those pull for the right projects for the organization as a whole. So what I put together is what I call the enterprise to make system. Nobody talks about this. If you're familiar with Six Sigma, Lean Six Sigma, they have a project to make system or define, measure, analyze, improve, control. But what I put together here is an enterprise to make system. I wanted to have a methodology that was long-lasting in the front end, not everything built on strategies. So in this methodology, we define what we do. This is our business. We then measure what we do. We create a value chain. Now the value chain is not the org chart. The org chart becomes subordinate to the value chain. The value chain is going to be long-lasting. This is, I develop a product, I go in and market a product, I sell a product, and I collect revenue. Those kind of metrics, those kind of functions. And we want to have measurement that looks at the success of those. Then what we have is the org chart becomes subordinate to this. So if we have a reorganization, no big deal. We're not going to change our metrics, we're just going to simply change ownership of those metrics. So define and measure is pretty consistent on the long haul whenever for your particular business. Then what you want to do is analyze the enterprise as a whole and figure out where you should focus your efforts. You want to look at where the bottleneck might be, and that's where the graph in the upper right-hand corner is. If you notice, we got various stages throughout this graph on the right-hand side, and those could be like departments. Now, if we establish goals throughout the business and they were equal goals, that wouldn't necessarily help the organization as a whole. Where it should be working on is step 5. So fundamentally, we need to look at the overall organization and establish goals throughout the organization that's kind of dependent upon the business at that point in time. So in other words, again, if you've got plenty of capacity but you're not able to sell everything you make, then you should be focused on sales, and vice versa. If you can sell everything you make but you can't manufacture enough, then you need to work on the manufacturing process. We also want to go in, as part of Analyze, we want to do risk assessments. That's what FMEA is about, failure modes that affect you now. So if we were actually doing that in the financial industry, you could roll back the time, and that we were using this system in the financial markets or companies that was in that business, they might know that, hey, these mortgages that we're wrapping and bundling and stuff, it's got high risk to it. And now we wouldn't want to do that. So if you use this overall system, you could have avoided the kind of problems we're experiencing right now. So when we get to this point of analyzing, we're trying to identify areas that we should focus our efforts on. And that's what's identified in the graphic in the lower right-hand corner. We establish goals for the enterprise. We then need to calculated, analytically and innovatively determine strategies that our lines of business need. And those become projects. Now, what kind of projects might you have? It could be a process improvement project, or it could be a design project. The one at the top, the DMAIC, is the design project, and the one at the bottom is a DMAIC project that you might have for process improvement. So in my books I passed around here, Volume 2 talks about and walks you through the enterprise to make process, and Volume 3, which is like 1,200 pages, it walks through the project to make, where it truly integrates Lean and Six Sigma tools. It's not saying you do all the steps within this overall roadmap, but it's teaching the thought process of working through that. Now, how does this work? Well, in the upper left-hand corner, you see the 30,000-foot level chart. If we looked at before it did a change, then we would notice that it did not do as well as we might like. And it might have a 30% area to the specifications on the right-hand side. We're going to consider that's not good enough. We'd like it better. So what you would do is then you would tool for the creation of a project, following the make roadmap, the project to make roadmap. You made an improvement to the 30,000-foot level metric, and it reached a new level of performance. And now you compare that to the specification, and you'll see how much improvement you make and can translate to bottom line benefits. So I went in and described a lot of material here today, and I thought issues that we had with our current system and also alternatives. Now, where might you go from here? Well, one of them, we do have webinars. We do have training sessions to learn more about this IEEE. I am going to be doing one-day sessions throughout the country. For example, in the near future, I'll be doing a couple sessions here in the Northeast where ASQ is going to be sponsoring them. I'll do an evening session, and I'll do a one-day session. So if you would like more information about that, I invite you to...
ASQ, I believe, in our newsletters.
Okay.
It's a link there. Yeah, we link to their website.
And so we can maybe pass that on to you. And then in that part of that class, you get 2 of my 4 new books, and I make many references to these books during those sessions, so that's something you can do. Also, I do have many articles at smartersolutions.com that you can find interesting. Also, I do have a video in there that shows how one company that implemented this IEEE system completely changed their behavior, and in a very short period of time, they were able to turn the company around and how they were looking at metrics and the actual behaviors that they have. Also, I do have these books here that the 2 of the books kind of describe this overall IEEE system. One of them is in novel format, that's volume 1, and also the paperback that kind of gives you a high-level picture of this overall IEEE system and some of the problems that you have with existing systems. Then volume 2 goes through the enterprise to make, and volume 3 goes through the project to make. So in this session, we talk about scorecards We got into red, yellow, green scorecards. We talked about sub-balanced scorecards and aligning our metrics to strategies, and that could not necessarily lead to right behaviors. Talked about how you could avoid firefighting by going in and having 30,000-foot level metrics first to see if the process is predictable, then making statements about what you predict. And if you don't like it and everybody agrees this is something you ought to be working on, then that creates a pull for project. So that's the end of my session. Is there questions here?
Down here. Okay. So we have time now for some questions. We have some chatting going on here. Hi, Amy. Hello, John. And John Corliss is saying, greetings to all. Please enter your name and chapter. And if more than one person is participating, please note where you're from and who you are. So we have Jonna and Lisa, please, and we have some chapters, different chapters. University of New Haven, Southern Connecticut campus, and we have some students from the University of New Haven online listening. And a question from Amy, do you think the current financial crisis has been caused by poor use of metrics? That's questions from...
Yes, I believe that is true. I think it's a combination of things. It's one of them, you can create policies that can end up driving metrics that lead to the wrong behaviors. I think we're going to be starting unraveling all these things, and I think there's some policies that may even happen in government and also other policies that we can have within the companies. And one of the policies is even the reward system for the executives and others. They're saying, hey, you need to meet these goals or you're going to not make bonuses. And that can drive the wrong kind of behaviors. So I very much definitely believe that metrics can drive the wrong kind of behaviors. And I've done a lot of thinking about this. Now, you may not agree with me, but I don't know how it is actually possible to go in and align financial metrics or financial rewards to metrics. The only one that to me makes sense that possibly could work is if you go in and look at the gross revenue that you've got or your percent margin, and now you went into some sort of profit sharing, so to speak, above a certain number and spread it out equally. Now, the other side of the coin on that, I don't think that's even completely bulletproof either, because if you happen to be in an industry that's the hot thing at the time, maybe the oil industry, for example, right now anyway, you're probably doing real well, so the people that happen to be in that industry, even though they're not doing great and wonderful performance, they're going to get compensated accordingly. But somebody else that's maybe working real hard in another industry that's not doing so good is not going to do as well. So even that, I think, has got some problems to it. But the problem is when you start going in and establishing goals and you start tracking people and have their compensation to those goals and the performance against those goals, you can get all sorts of game playing. Because next time you can start changing around the goals, we'll make it a little bit easier on the next time. And then the R can lead to the wrong behaviors. So I truly believe a lot of this could have been changed if you had different metrics and you wouldn't have the problems that you have today.
Other questions? One thing that my company is involved in the Shingo National Prize application process, and we've done it applied now 4 years in a row. They changed the metrics this year, and now it's sectioned 4-section criteria. And in Section 3, they're talking about systemic thinking, and they're really bringing that more into when they analyze the company and evaluate them. They're looking at this systemic thinking, and are you doing scientific analysis and thinking more bigger picture. And they're really pushing the A3 methodology. And what I think I'm hearing from what you're saying is that that's just like having balanced scorecards or the other tools, and it really still isn't getting to what you're talking about.
From what I've seen about A3, I'm not a big fan of it. because it's not really showing variability as part of that, at least from what I've seen. I'm not saying I'm an expert at it, but you need to look at variability, and a lot of times that's not reflected. Also, there's another concept that's Ocean Connery. That's a real big popular methodology where you're again lining it to strategies. And then the idea is you cascade that throughout the organization and you do what's called catchball, and it's basically negotiation to get these targets. And if you buy a book on Ocean Connery, sometimes what you'll do is you actually get a CD with all these templates. I mean, if you talk to anybody that's done it, that could be one heck of a lot of work. And guess what happens when your strategy changes next year? Changes the whole thing. You know, and so you have to fundamentally start all over. So I want to create a long-lasting system. And I'm suggesting you need to start from the value chain of how you do business. And if you track it to 30,000-foot level, it can completely change your behavior. I can guarantee you. Is it easy to do? No, because you have to change people's mindset. It's not easy. It won't happen overnight. Will everybody like it? What happens when you're doing this, you lower the water level, and you're going to be showing some real ugly rocks that some people perhaps have been hiding behind for years. So you can't game. You know, it's not going to make sense to go in and start moving. Sometimes what can happen is at the end of the quarter, we're not meeting our goals in sales, for example. So we may actually talk to a customer and say, you know, if you can go in and pay me in this quarter, and I'll give you a better price if you do that, then that would be nicer, right? So they go in and move it this quarter. Why? So the salesperson could make their bonus. You know, it may not happen in your company, but I think it's happened in several companies. Okay, so you can get things moving around. And what happens when you have this behavior? If you got a manufacturing organization, it could break its back. All of a sudden, it's moving along here. At the end of the quarter, you go in and get these spikes. You get more demand. So it's not healthy for the organization as a whole. So what you really like to do is really have measurements and so on that encourages the right kind of behaviors. And I think it's really important to start looking at it this way because, in my mind, we've got to do something fundamentally different with our management system. If our management system was so good, we wouldn't have the problems today. And that's what I'm really trying to do is create a long-lasting system. Now, you also mentioned like the Shingle Prize, and also we can put the Malcolm Baldrige Award in there in the status. Those awards are not prescriptive. You know, they tell you what they want you to do, but they don't tell you necessarily how to do it, right? What I'm really trying to do with this is create a governance system so what you can do is actually achieve the Shingle Prize in the spirit of everything at once in the Shingle Prize and also the Malcolm Baldrige Award. And if you take my one-day class, we have an exercise where when we get started, I ask people to go in and compare existing systems or rank existing system or evaluate existing system, I guess a better word, to Deming's 14 points. So Deming turned the Japanese around. And fundamentally, people don't think we're doing too good. And then I describe the side of belief system in this one day, and at the end of the day, we do a lot better. We're not perfect, but people think that this system is more consistent with the achievement and the exercising of Deming's 14 points. So I'm not trying to sound too arrogant here, but Deming had some great points, but he didn't have a system to pull it off. So what I'm really trying to do is create a framework and a governance system so you can actually achieve and do some of the many wonderful things that Deming talks about.
And we have a follow-up question to the original question, do you think the current financial crisis was caused by poor metrics? The follow-up question is, does that mean you think that pay for performance is wrong-headed? And John Corliss is also saying, or even merit pay is wrong-headed?
I know this is not very popular, but I think it is. I think you can never make everything fair. But the problem you get into, no matter, even if you try to do everything real fair, then the thing is it's impossible. I don't think it's possible to do. And so, and I know this is a big pill to swallow or it's a big management change, but I think you have to do something fundamentally different in that area. And I see how it's possible. And I'd be willing to talk to anybody. If they have some good ideas, I'd love to hear them. But I don't know how it's possible.
And then Amy's question is, how does implementation of your method affect resources for data acquisition and storage, since historical patterns are necessary to determine whether changes are significant. How do your customers deal with this?
Well, getting good data is not easy, and it's going to depend upon your overall system and how you do it and so on. Now, in reality, there's many articles written about how IT is trying to justify their existence many times. And they're doing a great job, but they don't get a lot of credit for it, and also it's somebody that doesn't often work, but it's really important, and we can't do without them kind of thing. But what I'm suggesting is enterprise thematic system, one potential area to manage it, and that's what I talk about in that book. I got Enterprise Process Management Group, and IT should be a fundamental part of that. So if you don't have good data today, you need to go in and create the system so that in the future they have the right kind of data. Now, in reality, what can happen is that the other challenge that you have is that many of the ERP systems don't give you data in a form that you can really use very well. So we just have to work through all that over time. The other thing that I think is really important with this system is I'm suggesting what you do is you start out small and you grow big. So even though you got a very big company, you could start in one piece of the business, and that's what we did in the metals facility that we started working on, and that's in a video on our website, is we started in one portion of the business or one site. And we started putting these metrics there, and then the idea is you can start growing into the other areas. So you start growing it over time.
Is there a computer system that has all these matrix all built in to them?
His question, he says, is there a computer system that has all these metrics built into it? Well, I say that the answer is no, but the thing is, everybody's got different computer systems anyway.
And different metrics.
And different metrics and so on, and it would have to just be built. It's not that it's very difficult to do, it's just that you have to look at data and compile them differently. And, it's just one of those things that's not that really that difficult. In fact, we have in Smarter Solutions, we're not a big company, that's just how we look at data. We go in and do the value chain, and we go in and look at how we're doing on web hits and things like that, something that's a metric that's important to us, and how we track it over time. It could completely change your behaviors. But it's nothing that you can't be over-confined. Yes?
I want to go back to that earlier question there about your disagreement with pay for performance or merit pay. If you don't really agree with those, is it the metrics that you're going to come up with? Is that what you're going to have to drive pay for performance?
Well, the thing is, what we've got to is on paper for performance. I'm not against pay for performance. In other words, if somebody's doing a better job, you pay them more. I'm all for that. What I was really referring to was that if somebody met their goals, and these are negotiated goals, and then we're going to pay them if they met these goals or not. That's what I was really talking about there, because we can end up gaming the goals. Now, obviously, we go back and look at how somebody's performing, and it's subjective. We'd like to make it analytical, but it's difficult to do that. When I was at IBM in the 80s, I took a bridge retirement in 92, to 24 years there. And when I was in the 80s, you had the performance review, how good did you do, and did you get this raise, and so on. And I'm all for that. Because everybody's not created equal. But the only thing that I'm talking about is we establish these goals, and then they tend to be subjective, and then now we're going to get pay for performance, how we met those goals. That's what I was really talking about. I think I should have made that a little clearer. Does that make sense?
Well, what you're saying, I guess, is that you want to make sure that the goals that they're going to be paid for are really the ones that make the most sense for the business.
Drive the right behavior.
Yeah.
Drive the right behavior.
And the problem you have if you just going in and establishing their goals, saying, did you meet this or not, then and establish what you do, a lot of times even internally, it can lead to the wrong behaviors. Give you an example, and it's not just at the executive level. This is a company that's dealing with relocation of people. Okay. Now, they had it set up so that everybody throughout the organization would get bonuses if they met certain numbers. Okay. Now, this one company had a very large check that they owed. You know, this company doesn't get to keep a lot of money, but you can imagine if they're managing houses and rentals, it can be a lot of money that flows through them. It was such a big amount that the CEO would have had to sign for the check. The people in the organization that they were dealing with didn't want to have the CEO to sign it. They said, well, can you break it over a longer period of time? So they did that, and what did that do? That affected the bonuses. And so what did somebody take it upon themselves? They went in and took that shift out, figuratively, and then it messed up their whole accounting system. So that's the kind of problem you get, is a lot of times we'll set these goals, people can make it, they feel good for a while, and then, you know, it goes away. So trying to just set those goals and pay them relative to those goals, I don't know how you can make them fair. Because if you've got another function within your organization and they're doing better than this other function, it's difficult. One person over here in this function is not doing as good, they don't get paid as much as this one over here because the business for that particular area is not doing as well. And is that fair? That's not fair either. So it's just, I don't see how it's possible. You know, again, I'd be willing to talk with anybody offline on specifics, and then we could see if we can come up with anything. But I've thought about it a long time, and it's just tough. Other questions?
Nope, they're all set out there.
Okay, great. Well, I've enjoyed being with you this evening.
We thank you very much. I've had been through some training of my own over the past year, and so this, now hearing this again, impacts me differently than it did last year. So I got a lot out of it again this year. Thank you.